Why did she always end up standing at the edge of things? Not excluded, just unseen. It was a talent she had never meant to develop, the art of being invisible in plain sight. The morning sun pressed down on Fort Redstone's advanced marksmanship range, the kind of sun that made mirages dance and rifles shimmer like ghosts. From where she stood on the observation deck, Corporal Isla Thorne could see the heat blur rising above the earth, bending light and sound until distance itself seemed to ripple. She was holding a cup of coffee that had long gone cold, forgotten, like most of the small comforts she allowed herself. Downrange, the targets at 800 yards waited, blank, unbroken, a white line of quiet judgment. The air carried a faint scent of gun oil and dry grass, and something else, tension. The kind that hummed just under the skin like electricity before a storm. Below her, General Vincent Aldridge lay behind a custom Remington rifle, its barrel gleaming with the kind of maintenance only pride could provide. His posture was textbook, his jaw tight, his breathing off. Isla didn't need to look through a scope to see the problem. She had seen it before too many times, too many faces. The moment when a soldier's mind betrayed them. 13 shots. 13 misses. The wind had shifted, but not enough to excuse it. The man behind the trigger wasn't fighting the target anymore. He was fighting the ghost of who he used to be. The observers whispered among themselves, officers, enlisted, aides pretending not to notice. Major Kent Broderick stood arms crossed, his face composed but his jaw working behind the stillness. Sergeant Voss leaned toward Corporal Hayes, muttering something meant to lighten the mood, a joke swallowed by discomfort before it reached a smile. Specialist Torres, barely past her first year in uniform, clutched an ammo box like a lifeline, her gaze darting between the firing line and the sunburned horizon. No one wanted to be here. And yet no one could look away. The 14th shot cracked like an accusation. A puff of dust kicked up far to the right of the target. Miss again. The silence that followed felt heavier than any explosion. The general stepped back, frustration etched deep into the lines around his eyes. He rubbed his temples as if he could squeeze composure back into himself. The legend of Fort Redstone, the man whose hands once steadied in chaos, stood now like a monument to decline. Even the wind seemed to hesitate. Isla said nothing. She never did in moments like this. Observation was safer than intervention. At 5'6" with a forgettable face and a posture that apologized for existing, she had spent a career perfecting invisibility. Most soldiers had service records that told stories. Hers had entire pages missing. Redacted lines, classified designations, words replaced with black bars. To most, she was an administrative corporal assigned to logistics. To those who truly knew, she was a weapon placed in storage. But today was not supposed to be about her. Captain Felix Drummond, the range officer, approached the general with a clipboard that looked more like a shield. His expression carried the same tightness as a man walking through a minefield. They exchanged words too low to hear, but Isla didn't need the sound. She could read the shape of it in their movements. The schedule was collapsing. A visiting Allied delegation would be here within the hour, expecting precision and professionalism. Instead, they would find a general at war with himself. Torres edged closer to Isla's side, seeking proximity to calm. "Is it the wind, ma'am?" she asked quietly, her voice tentative. Isla shook her head. "No, the wind only moves what's already in motion." Torres frowned, not quite understanding, and stepped back again. The general loaded another round. His breathing quickened. Isla watched the small tremor in his left hand, a detail no one else noticed or maybe pretended not to. 15th attempt. The rifle barked. A tear appeared in the target paper, low, far from center. Technically a hit, spiritually another miss. For a second, no one moved. Then the general lowered his weapon, the quiet weight of defeat settling over him. Lieutenant Nora Castellan, his aide, tapped rapidly on her tablet, likely crafting the diplomatic excuse that would soon be needed. Major Broderick shifted uncomfortably. The enlisted men avoided eye contact like it might get them court-martialed. Isla took a slow sip of the coffee she'd forgotten again. Cold, bitter, appropriate. She knew what this was, the slow unraveling of certainty. Every soldier faced it eventually, the day their hands no longer obeyed memory. Some fought it, some hid, some broke. She'd been all three once. Drummond checked his watch. 43 minutes, sir, he muttered to Broderick, just loud enough for others to hear. The major only nodded. The range still had to be reset, the brass collected, the demonstration salvaged somehow, but everyone knew the morning had already gone off script. The visitors would see the cracks. The general chambered another round. Stubborn pride refused to yield. Isla could respect that. Pride was sometimes the only armor left when everything else failed. Shot 16. Miss. He stepped back again, shoulders rigid, then turned to the gathered soldiers. When he spoke, his voice carried the strain of too many years and too many expectations. Any snipers left in this army, he said, or have we all gone soft behind desks and screens? The words hit harder than the bullet had. Silence followed, alive and heavy. A dozen faces froze, eyes flickering toward one another, searching for someone brave or foolish enough to step forward. No one did. Corporal Hayes stared at his boots. Sergeant Voss swallowed hard. Torres stood motionless, eyes wide like a rabbit in open ground. Even Captain Drummond hesitated, torn between protocol and self-preservation. And Isla felt something stir inside her, not pride, not defiance, something quieter, the sense that certain silences were invitations. She set her coffee cup down on the wooden railing. The sound was small, but it carried. Heads turned. A breath held collective. Then she moved. Not quickly, not dramatically, just steady steps on gravel, the sound soft but deliberate. Each footfall cut through the stillness like punctuation. A few whispers rose. Someone chuckled nervously. It died fast. She didn't need to look to know how they saw her. Small, unremarkable, the least likely answer to the general's challenge. He turned toward her, his expression caught between disbelief and irritation. "Sir," she said evenly, "I can try if you'll allow it." Major Broderick's eyebrows lifted a fraction. Captain Drummond exhaled softly through his nose, part surprise, part dread. Torres froze mid-movement. Voss muttered something to Hayes. The word crazy slipped out. She ignored it. The general studied her face, searching for arrogance. He found none, just calm, the kind of calm that unnerved men used to command. Finally he spoke. "Your name, Corporal?" "Thorne, sir, Isla Thorne." He frowned. "Unit." She hesitated half a second, no more. "Administrative assignment, sir, pending reassignment." The truth, technically, but like most truths worth telling, incomplete. He glanced at Broderick, who gave a minute's shrug, nothing to lose now. The morning was already wrecked. "Very well, Corporal Thorne," the general said finally. "Show us what you have." She stepped to the firing line. The rifle waited, resting on its bipod like a living thing that had grown tired of disappointment. She didn't touch it immediately. Instead, she scanned the range, the wind flags, the heat shimmer, the sun's angle. Her world narrowed, distance, direction, light, simple, manageable. Behind her, someone whispered, "She's actually gonna do it." Someone else answered, "Not for long." She ignored them. When she finally lifted the rifle, her hands moved with the ease of recognition. The weapon settled into her shoulder like something that had been waiting to return. Her breathing slowed. The world shrank to geometry and breath. There were moments, rare ones, when everything aligned: physics, instinct, and silence. When the body stopped obeying and began knowing. This was one of them. The trigger broke clean. The sound cracked through the morning, echoing off the hills. Captain Drummond peered through the spotting scope. His voice carried clear across the deck. Target hit, center mass, 800 yards. A wave of murmurs swept through the observers. Disbelief. Surprise. Voss's jaw went slack. Torres let out a tiny gasp she tried to smother. Even the general blinked, as if uncertain whether to be pleased or offended. Isla said nothing. She cycled the bolt with a soft metallic click and adjusted a fraction wind shift, subtle but real. Second shot. 2 inches left of the first. Third shot within the same group. Drummond's tone changed, from detached professionalism to cautious awe. Broderick leaned closer to the spotting scope, his composure cracking. Hayes's smirk died completely. The murmurs turned to silence. By the time the fourth shot hit, the paper target at 800 yards looked almost bored, a perfect cluster of precision. Isla exhaled softly, not triumph, just completion. But she wasn't finished. She adjusted her elevation dial, her breath steady. Beyond the 800-yard line stood additional targets, 1,200, 15, 18, paper silhouettes waiting to be ignored. Behind her, Voss muttered, "No way she's." Then the fifth shot cracked. Drummond froze, looked again. 1,200 hit. The sixth, 1,500. The seventh, 18. Each word came slower, his voice struggling to keep up with disbelief. The air on the deck had changed. Every soldier felt it, that invisible pressure when something extraordinary happened in real time. The kind of moment that made people question what they thought was possible. Major Broderick stepped forward, eyes locked on the spotting scope. "That grouping, Jesus," he whispered. No one corrected him. The general said nothing now. His frustration had burned away, leaving only curiosity. He was watching like a man reacquainted with wonder or regret. Isla shifted slightly, her movements minimal, precise. She had entered that place every marksman dreamed of, the void between noise and focus, where thought ended and knowing began. Her breathing slowed further, her pulse quieted. 1,800, 2,022. Each hit confirmed not just skill, but something else, a history the Army had hidden behind black ink. Those who had seen her file would never speak of it. Those who hadn't never would. By her 13th round, the line between curiosity and reverence blurred. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The general stepped closer, his voice low, almost respectful. "How far can you reach, Corporal?" Isla's gaze traveled downrange, past the visible targets, to the faintest shimmer on the horizon, the distant berm marking 4,000 yards. Her pulse didn't quicken, her hands didn't tremble. She simply said, "Depends on the rifle, sir." The general nodded slowly, "Then show us what's possible." She looked through the scope again. 4,000 yards, nearly 2.5 miles. A range where bullet drop became poetry and wind turned into chaos. The math alone would drive most shooters mad. She didn't calculate on paper. She didn't need to. Her body remembered what her mind had forgotten to forget. Behind her, the soldiers waited, quiet now, reverent. The morning's embarrassment forgotten, replaced by anticipation of something they couldn't name. Isla adjusted, exhaled, and whispered to herself, though no one heard. Once more into silence. The trigger broke. The bullet began its long, invisible journey. And for 4.7 seconds, the world held still. For 4.7 seconds, nothing moved. Not the wind. Not the people. Not even time itself. Then a faint, delayed thump echoed from the horizon. Captain Drummond's voice broke through the silence, uncertain, like a man afraid to believe his own eyes. "Miss high and right about 30 yards." No one exhaled, not yet. Because that sound, even as a miss, had changed everything. The bullet had traveled nearly 2.5 miles. a sliver of metal defying distance, air, and reason. And even off target, it carried the promise that the impossible was suddenly possible. Isla stayed prone, eyes steady behind the scope. Her breathing never faltered. One shot was never the story. It was always the pattern that followed. She adjusted wind drift, thermal shimmer, density altitude, hundreds of small invisible truths learned across continents no one could name. Her mind wasn't calculating, it was remembering. Recalling the rhythm of air over a desert valley in Kandahar, the way mountain gusts in Kunar twisted mid-trajectory, how bullets behaved differently over salt plains in Syria. Every deployment left her with a language no textbook could teach. Behind her, someone whispered, "She hit at 4,000. Someone else answered, "She almost did." Even almost felt like legend. She breathed in slow, deliberate. The world shrank again. The gravel under her elbows, the faint sweat trickling down her temple. Her heart counted time better than any clock. The second shot cracked. The recoil felt lighter now, familiar. 4.7 seconds later, another echo rolled back from the hills. "Miss again," Drummond reported. "High left 15 yards. Closer." A whisper of movement behind her, Major Broderick shifting forward, eyes locked through the spotting scope. The general stood beside him, his face unreadable now. Not pride, not command, just focus. Isla's eyes flicked once toward the flags downrange. The wind had split, calm near, turbulent far. The hardest kind, the kind that punished arrogance. She adjusted again, elevation down half a click, left 3.5 mils. A touch on the cheek weld, the faintest pressure change on her trigger finger. A ritual older than fear. Specialist Torres was holding her breath again. Sergeant Voss gripped his phone so tightly his knuckles whitened. Hayes muttered a prayer that came out as static. Isla whispered something only the wind heard. Then she fired the third shot. Silence. 1, 2, 3, 4. The fifth second arrived like a promise kept. "Hit," Drummond's voice cracked through the radio. "Direct hit, 4,000 yards." The sound detonated through the ranks like an emotional concussion. A wave of disbelief, relief, and awe collided in a single heartbeat. Torres let out a noise somewhere between laughter and tears. Hayes stumbled backward, his expression breaking apart. Even Broderick, the ever-measured major, exhaled so sharply it sounded like a gasp. And the general, the man who had shouted that challenge moments ago, lowered his binoculars slowly, his eyes reflecting something Isla hadn't seen in a long time in any officer: wonder. He didn't smile, he didn't speak, he just looked at her like she'd opened a door he thought was locked forever. Isla sat up, calm, unhurried. Her movements were deliberate, composed, no victory, no celebration, just completion. She cleared the chamber, safed the rifle, set it back on its rest. Her fingers brushed the steel with something that almost looked like affection. Around her, the air vibrated with disbelief. Torres whispered, "She actually did it." Voss didn't answer. He was too busy recording the target through the scope, shaking his head like someone trying to wake from a dream. Major Broderick straightened slowly, turning toward the general. "Sir," he said softly, "that was 4,000 on the third shot." The general didn't move for a long moment. Then very quietly, "I know." He stepped forward, boots crunching on gravel. The gathered soldiers parted instinctively, as if sensing something private was about to unfold. He stopped beside Isla, lowering himself to one knee so they were eye level. "How far can you reach, Corporal?" he asked. She glanced toward the horizon, where heat shimmer made the air look liquid. "The rifle's at its limit," she said, "but sometimes it's not the weapon that matters." That made him smile, just barely. "Sometimes," he said, "it's the person behind it." The words weren't praise, they were recognition. Broderick leaned in toward the general. "Sir, with respect, we need to document this. That distance." "I know," Aldridge cut him off gently. "We will." But Isla had already begun to stand. Standing wasn't escape, it was transition. She could feel eyes on her from every direction. Men and women who had spent their lives measuring skill in neat categories, suddenly realizing there were levels they hadn't known existed. Torres approached her, nervous, reverent. "Corporal, how did you?" Isla only smiled faintly, one shot at a time. That was all she said. Behind her, the general and his officers spoke in hushed tones. The words classified, record, and debrief drifted on the wind. Lieutenant Castellan's tablet was glowing in the sunlight as she frantically typed, likely trying to pull Isla's record again. And again, finding nothing but redactions. Because her record wasn't missing. It was protected. Later, after the echo of that impossible shot faded, the range returned to its uneasy rhythm. Soldiers began collecting brass. The air still felt charged, as if lightning had passed through it. Every conversation began the same way. "Did you see?" Isla stood alone again, watching the distant targets shimmer. The rifle sat beside her, silent, innocent of its own history. And for the first time that morning, she let herself breathe. There was no pride in her expression. No triumph. Just quiet. She thought about the last time she had fired at that distance, years ago, in a place that didn't officially exist. The mission had ended differently. A heartbeat too soon. A life too late. The memory still came at night sometimes, the face of a man she never knew, the sound of her handler's voice through the radio. Target neutralized. Exfil. Now. They never spoke about the child that had stepped into frame too late. They never did. The cost of perfection was guilt measured in decimals. Now, watching the general standing where she once stood, proud, humbled, human, she felt something she hadn't in years. Connection. He caught her glance, nodded once. No words, just acknowledgement. Broderick approached her later, carrying the weight of understanding in his posture. "That was," he began, then stopped, shaking his head. "I've never seen anything like it." "You weren't supposed to," Isla replied softly. He studied her face. "You've done this before." She didn't answer. Her silence was answer enough. When the Allied delegation arrived 20 minutes later, the range looked deceptively calm. Targets patched, brass cleared, the chaos hidden beneath neat protocol. But everyone present knew nothing about this morning could ever be erased. 3 SUVs stopped near the deck, dust curling in their wake. Foreign officers stepped out, British, French, Canadian, exchanging polite handshakes and measured smiles. They were expecting a standard demonstration. What they got instead was a story already turning into legend. General Aldridge met them with the easy professionalism of a man who had regained his composure, and perhaps something else, confidence reborn through humility. "Gentlemen," he said, gesturing toward the range, "you missed quite the performance. One of our corporals provided an unscheduled demonstration of long-range precision, exceptional even by special operations standards." The British colonel frowned slightly. 4,000 yards, I was told. Aldridge smiled faintly. "You were told correctly." Eyes widened. The delegation murmured among themselves. Broderick guided them toward the spotting scope, where the torn target at the horizon shimmered in the heat. The colonel bent to look, adjusted focus, then straightened slowly, exhaling. "Good God," he whispered, "that's artistry." Aldridge motioned toward Isla. "Corporal Thorne, our long-range specialist, temporarily attached to Fort Redstone." It was a half-truth, but it served. She stepped forward, posture straight, expression calm. The officers watched her like she was an optical illusion. The British colonel extended his hand. "Remarkable shooting, Corporal." "The conditions were favorable," she said simply, And the rifle is excellent. A practice deflection, humble, controlled. The French lieutenant colonel tilted her head. You compensated for crosswinds manually. No digital correction. Yes, ma'am. A pause, then softly moaned ya. A ripple of low laughter broke the tension, respectful rather than mocking. The general caught Isla's eye, the faintest trace of gratitude there. Hours later, long after the delegation had left, Fort Redstone exhaled. The day's tension melted into twilight. The sun lowered over the hills, painting the sky in copper and rose. Isla found herself back where it began, at the edge of the range. Holding a new cup of coffee she would again forget to drink. She watched the wind flag flutter, softer now. The paper targets downrange replaced, clean, unscarred. Tomorrow, some trainee would shoot them, never knowing that hours earlier, one of them had been struck from 2.5 miles away. Footsteps approached. Broderick again. He stopped beside her, silent for a long moment. The evening air hummed with crickets and memory. The general wants to see you later, he said finally. Private meeting. He didn't say why, but... He smiled faintly. I think he wants to apologize. She looked at him surprised. Apologize. He shouted at ghosts this morning. You reminded him he's still human. Broderick's voice softened. You reminded all of us. Isla nodded slowly, her eyes fixed on the horizon where the sun bled into the mountains. Sometimes people don't need reminding what they can do, she said quietly. They need reminding why they tried in the first place. Broderick looked at her, thoughtful. You ever get tired of carrying that kind of weight, Corporal? She smiled without humor. Every day, but that's the job. He nodded once, then turned to leave. Don't be late to the general's office. He's not a man who likes waiting. I won't be. When he was gone, she looked back toward the distant berm, the same horizon where her bullet had vanished. That faint shimmer still danced in the light. She imagined it, a quiet line through the air, a mark of precision and burden. The shot would fade, but the memory wouldn't. Not for her, not for anyone who had been here. The base would sleep tonight with a new story to tell, of a general who lost his edge, a woman who found it again, and a single impossible bullet that rewrote what people thought was possible. As the sun dipped fully below the hills, Isla closed her eyes and breathed once more into the silence. For a moment it felt like peace. But deep down she knew better. Peace was never permanent. It was just the pause before the next distance to measure. The general's office smelled of old paper, oil, and dusted brass. The kind of room that remembered things. Medals hung in neat order on one wall, not the flashy kind, but the kind earned in forgotten wars. Framed photographs sat behind glass, faces frozen mid-salute, uniforms faded by time. Even the air felt still, reverent. Corporal Isla Thorne stood in the doorway, her boots silent on the wooden floor. The light from the tall window fell across her face, a soft orange from the setting sun, as though the day itself was reluctant to end. Across the desk sat General Aldridge, sleeves rolled up, his posture informal but weighted with something that wasn't rank anymore, something closer to gratitude or guilt. He gestured toward the chair opposite him. Sit, Corporal, no need for formality. She obeyed without speaking, setting her cap in her lap. The silence between them wasn't awkward, it was full, a silence that held the entire morning's weight inside it. He poured water from a glass pitcher, not whiskey, not coffee. Even that choice said something. For the record, he began, voice rough from too many years and too many apologies unsaid, I didn't call you here for reprimand. Quite the opposite. He handed her the glass. She took it with a small nod, waiting. I wanted to thank you, he said, leaning back, for what you did this morning and for what you reminded me of. Her brow furrowed slightly. Sir. He smiled faintly. That excellence still exists in this army. His gaze drifted toward the wall of medals. And that sometimes, it doesn't wear the rank we expect. For a long moment, neither spoke. The clock on the wall ticked softly. Outside, a truck rumbled past the parade field. The base was winding down, unaware that inside this small room, something quiet and significant was taking place. "I lost my edge years ago," the general said finally, voice low. "Didn't want to admit it. You spend a lifetime being the one everyone looks up to, then one day, your hands don't listen, your eyes betray you, and the men you train start whispering when you walk past." He chuckled drily, humbling thing failure. Isla listened without interrupting. Her expression didn't change, but her eyes softened, that faint, human empathy that made her so dangerous and so rare. "Failure isn't final, sir," she said gently. "It's just data." That earned a real smile. "Data," he repeated, spoken like someone who's missed before. She looked down at her hands. The glass trembled slightly, not from fear, from memory. "I've missed," she said quietly, "and not always at paper." The words hung there, uninvited but honest. Aldridge studied her for a long moment. He had read enough redacted files to know what kind of missions left those words behind. He didn't ask. Some questions weren't meant to be answered. Instead, he nodded slowly. "I figured as much. Lieutenant Castellan tried to pull your file earlier. Half the things blacked out." He smirked. "When an aide can't open something, it usually means it belongs to someone interesting." "I'm not interesting, sir, just used to being quiet." "That's exactly why I wanted to talk to you." He leaned forward, elbows on the desk. "You know, I've spent most of my career shouting orders at people trying to look brave. You didn't need to raise your voice once this morning, and yet the whole base will be talking about you by nightfall." She shook her head, uncomfortable. "That's not what I wanted." "Doesn't matter," he said softly. "Some things just happen when truth gets exposed to daylight." Another pause. The general picked up a small silver coin from his desk, one of those special unit challenge coins carried only by operators from certain places. He turned it over in his hand. "You were special operations, weren't you?" he asked, not as a superior, but as a man who already knew the answer. Isla didn't blink. "I was assigned where I was needed, sir." He chuckled, shaking his head. "You people are all the same. You could be bleeding out on the ground and still say you're attached in an advisory capacity." Then quieter, "I respect it." He set the coin down and looked at her directly. "What I don't respect is seeing that kind of skill wasted in admin duty." "Wasted?" she asked softly. "Don't play modest," he said. "I know a once-in-a-generation marksman when I see one. Hell, when I saw you touch that rifle before the first shot, I knew. The weapon stopped being equipment. It became an extension." He looked away, almost embarrassed by his own sincerity. "You reminded me of something I used to feel, before meetings and politics dulled it." She wanted to thank him, but the words wouldn't form. Praise had never sat comfortably on her. Instead, she asked, "What happens now?" He took a breath. "I've already made some calls. You'll be reassigned soon. Somewhere that matches what you can actually do. Somewhere your skills mean something." That landed heavier than he probably intended. Reassignment. The word carried weight, purpose, yes, but also memory, because every reassignment in Isla's past had come with ghosts. She met his gaze evenly. "Sir, permission to speak freely." "Always." "With respect, I'm not sure I want that." It surprised him. His eyebrows lifted slightly. "You don't want to do what you're good at." She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Being good at something doesn't mean it doesn't hurt, sir." He sat back, studying her again. The air between them grew thick, not with awkwardness but understanding. "You've seen some things," he said quietly. "I've seen what happens when skill turns into obligation." Her voice was even, but it carried the texture of memory, sharp, raw, restrained. "Out there you don't shoot for pride or practice. You shoot for survival. You pull the trigger and someone disappears. Sometimes that someone deserved it. Sometimes. She trailed off. Sometimes it's not that simple, the general finished for her. She nodded. He looked down at his hands, the same hands that had shaken after his missed shots that morning. I think I understand more than you think. The room fell silent again. The sun had lowered another inch, and the light shifted from gold to amber, tracing lines across the metals on the wall. Neither of them moved for a long moment. Finally, the general stood and walked to the window, his silhouette framed against the dying light. "You know what I realized today, Corporal?" he asked without turning. "We don't lose skill, we lose certainty. The difference between confidence and doubt is the width of a breath." He turned back toward her. "You reminded me what it feels like to breathe right." Isla's lips parted, but no words came. Her throat felt tight for reasons she couldn't name. "You don't owe me an explanation," he continued. "But if you ever decide to teach again, officially or otherwise, I'll see to it that you have the range, the resources, and the freedom to do it." "Teach," she repeated softly. "Someone like you shouldn't disappear. You should multiply." He smiled faintly. "Train others. Pass it on. The army needs ghosts like you, but it also needs the people who can teach others to see them." Something shifted in her eyes then, a flicker of purpose, maybe even hope. It wasn't something she'd allowed herself to feel in a long time. "Thank you, sir," she said quietly. "That means more than you know." "I think I do know," he said, "more than most." When she left his office, the sun had vanished completely. The hallway outside was lit by the pale buzz of fluorescent lights, humming like restless thoughts. Every soldier she passed seemed to recognize her now. Salutes where there had been indifference, nods where there had been oblivion. The invisible woman had become a story. By the time she reached the base courtyard, evening had settled in fully. The air was cool, the sky painted in deep shades of violet and blue. Across the compound, a group of young soldiers clustered near the canteen, whispering, glancing her way, then pretending they weren't. Tor stood among them, smiling shyly when their eyes met. Isla nodded back, a small human acknowledgement. Moments like that mattered more than medals. As she walked toward the barracks, the sound of boots on gravel echoed softly behind her. She turned slightly. Sergeant Voss and Corporal Hayes both hesitated like children caught misbehaving. "Corporal Thorne," Hayes began, voice uneven. "Ma'am, we just wanted to say sorry for earlier. We didn't mean to." She stopped him with a small smile. "You don't need to apologize. We all underestimate things we don't understand." Voss nodded, his usual swagger gone. "We won't forget what we saw today." "Good," she said. "Just remember what it really meant." They looked puzzled. "Which was?" Hayes asked. "That hitting the target isn't the hard part," she said softly. "It's carrying what it means afterward." Neither of them replied. They didn't need to. She walked on, leaving them behind, two soldiers standing in the quiet wake of something they'd only just begun to grasp. That night Fort Redstone felt unusually alive. Stories spread faster than the evening wind. The details shifted with each retelling, distances stretched, times exaggerated. By midnight, someone claimed she had fired blindfolded. By dawn, another insisted she had done it with a standard-issue rifle. Myth, after all, was just truth with better lighting. In her bunk, Isla lay awake staring at the ceiling. The barracks were quiet except for the hum of distant generators. She thought of the general's words, "You should multiply." It wasn't the promotion kind of offer. It was something deeper. A chance to give meaning to what had cost her so much. She turned on her side, eyes tracing the faint glow of moonlight across the room. Every soldier had a battle that didn't show up in reports. For her, it was the space between precision and peace. The distance between what she could do and what she wished she didn't have to. She closed her eyes, but sleep didn't come. Only the slow replay of the morning. The rifle's recoil, the pause before confirmation. Drummond's voice over the radio hit. The sound still echoed in her chest. Except now the echo wasn't pride. It was something gentler, redemption maybe, or acceptance. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. And that was enough. She woke before dawn not because of alarms, but because silence had a weight she could feel. The kind of silence that comes just before a storm or a memory. Corporal Isla Thorne sat up slowly, swinging her feet to the floor. The barracks were still. The other soldiers slept in the rhythm of deep exhaustion, their breathing steady in the dim half-light. She rubbed her face, feeling the dull ache behind her eyes, not fatigue but awareness. The world had changed overnight. Or maybe it was the same world, and she was the one who changed. She dressed in silence, her motions practiced and minimal. Outside, Fort Redstone was waking up. The horizon blushed faintly with the promise of sunrise. Trucks rumbled in the distance, and a far-off bugle called reveille, that old, tired tune of discipline and duty. She stepped into the cold air, her breath forming pale ghosts before her. And everywhere she went, heads turned. Not in hostility, not in suspicion, just in recognition. It was new and strange. Yesterday, she'd been invisible, the quiet woman in admin fatigues who fetched reports and disappeared into hallways. Today, she was legend before breakfast. A sergeant watering the base garden paused mid-motion. "Morning, Corporal," he said, too polite, too formal. A private carrying supplies gave her a nod that bordered on reverence. Even the MPs at the gate, men who'd never looked up before, straightened as she passed. It was strange how attention could feel like both warmth and weight. She nodded back, polite, brief, but something inside her stayed cautious. Recognition was dangerous. It invited curiosity. And curiosity led to questions. Questions she couldn't answer. The mess hall was louder than usual. Word had spread faster than rumor ever should have. Every table seemed to hold a different version of the same story. "I heard she hit at 5,000 yards, one soldier said. "Nah, it was 3,500, but she was using iron sights," another countered. Someone laughed. Someone else swore it had been verified by the general himself. When Isla walked in, the noise didn't stop, it just shifted. Conversation softened, eyes followed her, the kind of quiet that wasn't silence but respect's uneasy cousin. Specialist Torres spotted her and waved, hesitant but sincere. "Corporal, over here." Isla hesitated for a beat, then walked over. Torres had already cleared a spot at the table, as if she'd half expected, half prayed she would come. "Morning, ma'am." "Just Corporal is fine," Isla said gently, setting down her tray. Torres grinned awkwardly. "Still can't believe what happened yesterday. Everyone's talking about it." "I noticed." "General been in briefings all morning. Some colonel from DC even called. They're saying it's—" "Enough," Isla interrupted softly. "Let them talk, just make sure you don't." Torres blinked, confused. "Sorry, ma'am, I didn't mean." Isla softened her tone. "I know, but some stories grow teeth when you feed them." Torres nodded quickly, chastened. Then quieter, "Was it really 4,000? Isla met her eyes for a long moment, then looked away. "Let's just say it was far enough to change the conversation." Torres smiled at that, but Isla saw the curiosity still burning behind it. She remembered being that young, eager, wide-eyed, desperate to understand how greatness worked, not realizing it came with a cost. She reached for her coffee and took a sip. It was hot this time, bitter, grounding. Outside, sunlight spilled across the parade field, catching the flags as they rose with the morning wind. The day had barely begun, and already it felt heavier than most. By midday, her name had reached beyond Fort Redstone. The Defense Network newsfeed ran a short feature, unnamed sources, leaked footage, grainy stills. Someone had filmed part of her shot on a phone, and though it never showed her face, the footage went viral across internal military channels. Unknown corporal achieves record-breaking marksmanship, the headline read. The video title was worse, The Ghost at 4,000 Yards. She saw it on a monitor in the armory, playing in a loop. She said nothing. She just reached out, pressed the power button, and watched the screen go black. For the rest of the day, soldiers treated her differently. Not with fear, not exactly, but with distance, like she was something sacred or dangerous or both. It wasn't their fault. They didn't know how to stand next to someone who'd done the impossible. And Isla didn't know how to stand next to people who hadn't seen what that impossibility costs. Major Broderick found her late in the afternoon near the shooting range. He approached quietly, carrying a folder tucked under one arm. "General Aldridge wanted me to deliver this," he said. "Your updated assignment packet." She didn't take it right away. That was fast. The wheels turn quicker when something makes the headlines. He gave a half smile. "Congratulations, Corporal. You just became a point of national interest." She finally accepted the folder, flipping it open. Most of it was standard reassignment notice, clearance verification, relocation schedule. But at the bottom, stamped in bold red, she saw it. Special Evaluation Program, Advanced Marksmanship Instruction, Undisclosed Facility. "Teaching," she murmured. "Exactly what the general promised," Broderick said. "You'll be training select candidates top percentile. It's a big deal, Isla." She nodded, staring at the paper like it might change if she blinked. Big deal, sure. But all she saw was another beginning that might end the same way, with ghosts and silence and names not to be spoken. Broderick seemed to read it in her face. "You don't want this, do you?" She looked up, eyes calm. "I didn't ask for it." He hesitated, searching for words. "You earned it." "Maybe," she said, "but earning something doesn't mean you're ready to live it again." Broderick exhaled, long and slow. "You ever think you're too hard on yourself?" She smiled faintly. "That's how I stay sharp." He nodded, recognizing the futility in arguing with her. "You leave in 2 days," he said finally. "Transport at 500. Orders are sealed, only the general and I know your destination." "Understood." As he turned to leave, he stopped. "For what it's worth," he said softly, "you made this base believe in excellence again. That's not a small thing." She didn't answer until he was gone. Then she whispered to the wind, "Belief is easy when someone else carries the burden." That night the general hosted an informal gathering at the officers' club, a celebration masked as a debrief. The entire command chain attended. There were toasts, speeches, polite laughter. Isla stood near the back, quiet as ever. She didn't belong here, and everyone knew it, including her. General Aldridge caught her eye from across the room and raised his glass slightly, a gesture of respect. She returned it, a small nod, then looked away. Torres was there too, eyes wide, dressed in her cleanest uniform. She approached timidly with a glass of soda. "You okay, ma'am?" "I don't like noise," Isla said softly. Torres grinned. "You don't have to like it, you caused it." That earned a small laugh from Isla, the kind that didn't reach her eyes, but still warmed the air around her. The general began speaking then, his voice carrying across the room. He spoke about leadership, humility, the reminder that greatness can wear any rank. When he mentioned her, he didn't name her. He didn't need to. Everyone knew. "Sometimes," he said, "a single act can remind an entire unit what precision really means, not just in aim, but in purpose." The room applauded. Isla didn't move. Torres leaned closer. "He's talking about you." "I know," she said, "but listen carefully, he's not really talking about shooting." Torres frowned, then understood. And when she did, her expression softened with quiet admiration. After the gathering ended, Isla stepped outside. The night air was cool, the sky wide and clear. The base lights glowed faintly across the field, outlining the silhouettes of the range and the tower beyond it, where the impossible had happened less than 48 hours ago. She stood there for a long time, listening to the hum of distant machinery, the faint laugh of soldiers heading back to quarters. The world moved on, as it always did. But she lingered in that stillness between noise and memory. Footsteps approached again, lighter this time, Tor's. The young specialist hesitated beside her. "You'll be leaving soon, right?" "Yes." "Where to?" "Somewhere quiet." Tor's nodded. "Figures." For a moment they both watched the horizon. The stars above the range looked sharp and endless. Finally Tor's asked the question she'd been holding back. "Why do you do it, ma'am? I mean, people like you could do anything. Why stay in something that takes so much?" Isla smiled faintly, her eyes fixed on the sky. "Because someone has to remind the next person how far is possible. Otherwise, distance wins." Tor's thought about that, nodded slowly. "I hope I can be like that one day." "You will," Isla said softly. "Just remember, the point isn't to be noticed. It's to be ready when the silence calls." The younger woman smiled, not entirely understanding but feeling the truth in it. She saluted, awkward but sincere. Isla returned it crisp, exact, almost ceremonial. Then Tor's turned and walked away, her shadow stretching long in the floodlight. Isla stayed there until the lights dimmed, until even the wind seemed to fall asleep. Then she whispered the same words she'd said before the impossible shot, words no one else had ever heard. Once more into silence. The next morning would come with new orders, new transport, and a new horizon. But for now, she stood between the life she had lived and the one waiting ahead, a space few ever notice, where purpose feels both heavy and light. For most soldiers, glory comes from being seen. For her, it came from disappearing. And as the first faint light of dawn crept over Fort Redstone, Corporal Isla Thorne stood alone by the empty range, a quiet figure silhouetted against the rising sun, proof that sometimes the loudest echoes come from the calmest hands. Because true mastery isn't about noise. It's about the moment you breathe, aim, and let go, trusting that what leaves you will find its mark. The bus left Fort Redstone at 500 sharp. No fanfare, no farewell. Just the low rumble of the engine and the soft hiss of morning fog swallowing everything familiar. Corporal Isla Thorne sat by the window, her duffel at her feet, her rifle case strapped carefully across the aisle. She didn't look back. There was no reason to. Some chapters close better in silence. The landscape rolled by in muted colors, endless stretches of desert, power lines vanishing into the horizon, and occasional signs that meant little to anyone not lost enough to follow them. She liked it that way. Movement without conversation. Destination without explanation. The driver said nothing, just followed the coordinates he'd been given, unmarked, restricted, far from anything with a name. Halfway through the journey, they left the paved road behind. The sound changed, rubber tires grinding over gravel and dirt, wind rattling the windows. Somewhere out there the world was awake, cities, offices, traffic, noise. Here there was nothing, just distance. And in distance, she always found herself again. It was nearly noon when the facility came into view, a cluster of low concrete buildings surrounded by fencing, half buried in the desert like something forgotten by design. The gate bore no insignia, only a number, R17. The bus stopped at the checkpoint. Two guards in unmarked fatigues approached, silent, efficient, faceless behind tinted goggles. One held a scanner, the other took her papers. He read them once, nodded, and without a word waved her through. No salutes, no greetings, just process. That too was familiar. Inside, the air smelled of oil, metal, and sunburnt sand. Everything was functional, no decorations, no sentiment. Just a place built for precision. A woman met her near the entrance, mid-30s, sharp posture, steady gaze. "Corporal Thorne?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am. I'm Captain Rhea Collins. I'll be your operations liaison while you're here. Welcome to Range 17. She extended a hand, firm, professional. Isla took it. "Thank you." Collins started walking, motioning for her to follow. "We keep things simple here. You'll be training select candidates, reconnaissance, special ops, and intel marksmen. People who already think they know what they're doing." "I see." "They won't, not after you're done with them." That line was delivered without arrogance, just certainty. They walked down a corridor lined with photographs, all blurred faces and distant silhouettes. "Everyone who trains here stays unrecorded," Collins explained. "No names, no public files, just skill. You'll fit right in." "I'm beginning to see why I was chosen," Isla said quietly. Collins gave her a sidelong glance. "We do choose, we recover." That word stayed with her, recover. As if she'd been missing, even while standing in plain sight. Her quarters were small, functional, clean. A cot, a desk, a locker. No mirrors, no distractions. She unpacked with the same ritual care she'd done 100 times before, boots aligned, rifle cleaned, uniform folded tight. Everything in order, even when her thoughts weren't. After settling in, she stepped outside to the training field. Rows of shooting lanes stretched into the desert, each one marked by worn flags that barely moved in the still heat. Targets shimmered in the distance, ghostly shapes at impossible ranges. It felt like home and exile at once. A voice called behind her, "You're Thorne." She turned. A man in his late 20s stood there, lean, confident, carrying the easy arrogance of someone who'd never truly failed. "Lieutenant Jace Monroe," he said, extending a hand. "They said you're the new instructor." "I am." He smiled too quickly. "Heard you pulled off some miracle shot. Everyone been talking." Isla tilted her head slightly. "Miracle shots don't exist, Lieutenant. Only math." Monroe grinned, unfazed. "Still, not everyone hits at 4,000. "Most don't need to," she said, and walked past him toward the range. He watched her go, his grin fatting into something more cautious. There was something about her, quiet, measured, but heavy, like gravity itself. The kind of presence that demanded respect without asking for it. By afternoon, she had her first group assembled, 6 trainees, each from different branches, each with their own habits and egos. They lined up, curious, expectant. She said nothing for a long time, just stood there, scanning their stances, their breathing, the way their fingers rested on triggers. Every detail told her everything she needed to know. Finally, she spoke. "You all think shooting is about accuracy," she said softly. "It's not." They exchanged puzzled glances. "Shooting is about truth. You don't miss because of wind or scope or pressure. You miss because something in you hesitated, a fraction, a thought, a doubt. You can't lie to a rifle. It knows when you're uncertain." Her voice carried no sharpness, just calm authority, the kind that made even seasoned operators straighten their shoulders. "Today," she continued, "you'll shoot at 1 mile, tomorrow farther. But understand this, if you only measure distance, you'll never understand impact." They listened not because they had to, but because they wanted to. She walked behind each one, adjusting posture, correcting micro errors, hand tension, shoulder angle, breath discipline. Every movement was deliberate. Every correction intimate. When she touched a trainee's elbow or shoulder, it wasn't command, it was clarity. By the end of the session, not a single shot had landed where it began the morning. Precision was no longer a target, it was a mindset. That night, Isla returned to her quarters, body sore, mind alive. She hadn't felt this kind of exhaustion in years, not from battle but from purpose. She cleaned her rifle slowly, the way monks polish ritual instruments. Every sound, the metallic click, the soft brush of oil became part of her rhythm again. Outside, the desert wind sang against the walls. It reminded her of somewhere else, another desert, another wind. Different year, same silence. She paused, staring at the reflection of her own eyes in the rifle's scope. And for a moment, she saw someone else there, the version of herself who hadn't yet learned to carry ghosts quietly. A knock broke her trance. "Come in." Captain Collins entered holding a file. "Performance reports. Monroe says you scared them." "I told them the truth." Collins smiled faintly. "That'll do it." She set the file on the desk but didn't leave. "You know, this place has seen every kind of shooter from scientists to soldiers. But what you did today, that was different." "Different how?" "They didn't just follow orders, they listened. You got under their armor." Isla looked away. "That's not always a good thing. It is when it changes how they see the job." Collins hesitated. "What made you start teaching again, after everything?" Isla considered her answer carefully. "Because someone once taught me that silence isn't peace, it's waiting. And I'm tired of waiting." That made Collins nod, the kind of nod that said she understood more than her words revealed. "Well," she said softly, "welcome back to the noise." Days passed. Training intensified, distances grew. The trainees began to change, not just in aim but in posture, patience, and something deeper, humility. Monroe, once cocky, now asked questions. Private Liu, who had flinched at every shot, learned to control her breathing until it was inaudible. Each of them carried a piece of Isla's philosophy now, that marksmanship wasn't domination, but discipline. And through it all she stayed composed. Except at night. At night she dreamt again. The same mission, the same mistake. A wind she hadn't accounted for. A figure stepping into the line of fire. The sound not of impact, but of silence after. That endless, crushing silence. She'd wake before dawn, heart pounding, the echo still in her ears. Then she'd dress, walk to the range, and stand where the first light touched the earth, breathing it away, one sunrise at a time. One evening, Monroe approached her while she was packing up. "Permission to ask something, Corporal." "Ask." He hesitated. "You ever regret being this good?" She looked at him for a long time, every day. He nodded slowly, as if the answer confirmed something he'd always suspected but never wanted to believe. "But," she added quietly, "regret doesn't mean rejection. It just means I understand the weight." "What weight?" "The distance between knowing you can and wishing you didn't have to." Monroe didn't respond. He didn't need to. He just nodded once, then walked away, carrying that truth like a stone he'd have to learn to balance. That night, after the last lights went out, Isla sat outside her quarters staring at the stars. The desert stretched endlessly around her, vast, quiet, patient. In the distance, faint flashes marked the night range, like lightning trapped in glass. She closed her eyes, and in that darkness, the memory of the shot returned, not the glory, not the applause, just the moment before it left the barrel. The stillness. The surrender. The tiny, invisible act of trust. She realized then, maybe the shot had never really been about proving anything. Maybe it had been about letting go. About reminding herself that even in precision, there's mercy. That every distance, no matter how far, eventually ends somewhere. When she finally stood, the wind had picked up. She whispered into it, the same quiet prayer she carried from place to place, mission to mission. "May what leaves my hands never return in regret." And the desert, vast, ancient, unjudging, carried her words away, scattering them like dust over the world. The wind had changed. Not by much, just a subtle shift in direction, a softer edge to the heat, but Corporal Isla Thorne felt it immediately. Every shooter does. The air speaks differently when something's coming. It had been 3 weeks since her arrival at Range 17, and the once skeptical trainees now moved with the still precision of people who'd stopped guessing and started listening. They no longer talked between shots. They breathed like she breathed. They waited like she waited. This morning, the target stood at 2 miles. A faint mirage shimmered over the distance, the kind that plays tricks on confidence. Isla crouched beside the line, scanning posture, reading the rhythm of hesitation. "Remember," she said quietly, "distance doesn't forgive, it forgets. If you miss, it won't come back for you." The line fired. 6 cracks rolled into one. Through the spotting scope, dust bloomed across the sand, too high, too wide, too eager. Monroe cursed under his breath. Liu whispered a prayer. Isla only watched. Then she said softly, "You're fighting the wind instead of listening to it. Try again." They adjusted. Breathed. Fired. This time 2 hits. Small, perfect tears in the fabric of distance. A ripple of disbelief ran through the line, not celebration, just quiet awe. That was progress. Later in the operations room, Captain Collins slid a tablet across the table. Word from command. They're impressed. Results like this usually take months. Isla scanned the data absently. They'll lose interest once the headlines change. Collins studied her. "You really don't believe in recognition, do you?" "I believe in readiness," Isla said. "Recognition gets people killed." Collins smiled wryly. "You're not wrong, but sometimes the right story saves careers, even lives." "Stories don't save anyone," Isla murmured. "They just remind us who didn't make it." Collins didn't argue. She'd seen the same look before, soldiers who lived on the border between pride and penance. Before leaving, she added, "You've got a visitor coming tomorrow. Clearance Alpha didn't say who." Isla froze mid-breath. Visitors were rare here, too rare. "From Fort Redstone." "Higher," Collins said, "much higher." The next morning broke clear and windless, the kind of rare stillness that makes the desert feel suspended in glass. When the helicopter arrived, it kicked up a storm of dust that swallowed the horizon. Through the haze stepped General Aldridge. He looked older, the kind of older that doesn't come from time but from realization. The last time she'd seen him, he'd been reborn through her shot. Now he carried something heavier, respect sharpened by gratitude. "Permission to enter your classroom, Corporal," he called over the rotors. She smiled faintly. "If you can still pass qualification, sir." He laughed, a dry, genuine sound, then gestured for her to walk with him. They found a quiet corner of the compound, away from trainees and noise. He didn't waste time. "I needed to see this for myself. The reports say you've built a new standard here." "I just reminded them to breathe," she said. "That's what leadership is," he replied. "Reminding people of simple things they forget when the world gets loud." He paused, looking across the range. "They'll want to expand this program, make it official. You'd lead it." "Lead," she echoed. "I thought I was here to teach." He met her eyes. "You've done both since the day you picked up that rifle." She looked away, the wind tugging at her sleeve. "You really think command cares about teaching? They care about records." "Maybe," he said, "but sometimes a record opens doors we didn't know we needed." She didn't answer. There was a distance in her gaze he couldn't measure. Finally, he asked the question that had been waiting since he'd stepped off the chopper. "What really happened before Fort Redstone?" She didn't move, didn't blink. For a long time, there was only the sound of wind scraping against metal. Then softly, "It was a winter op. Northern Ridge, classified target. We had clearance, perfect conditions. I took the shot. Wind changed, it hit someone else." Aldridge's jaw tightened. "Civilian." "Child," she whispered. He exhaled slowly. the kind of exhale that carries both understanding and helplessness. I see. No, sir, she said quietly. You don't because you learned to miss. I didn't, not until then. The silence after that was unbearable, not awkward, just sacred. Finally, she added, that's why I stopped teaching. I didn't trust what my hands remembered. And now, he asked gently, now I teach so they don't forget what trust costs. Aldridge nodded, his eyes glistening with something unspoken. Then maybe that's the redemption we both needed. He didn't salute when he left. He just placed a small coin in her hand, the same silver one from his desk at Redstone. For luck, he said. She watched the helicopter rise and vanish into the pale sky, its echo fading like an old promise. For the first time in years, she didn't feel alone with the memory. She felt seen, not for the legend but for the wound. Days blurred again. The trainees improved. Monroe's arrogance turned into patience. Liu began mentoring others. Even the range itself seemed to hum differently, less like a proving ground, more like a sanctuary. But inside Isla, something was shifting. The visit had reopened doors she'd kept locked, voices, faces, the weight of that winter wind. At night, she found herself standing outside under the stars, whispering coordinates she'd sworn never to repeat, as if numbing them could finally release them. One evening, Collins joined her on the observation deck. Beautiful out here, she said, if you forget why the place exists. Isla smiled faintly. Some beauty only survives because people guard it from afar. Collins studied her. You think you'll ever go back out there? Operational, I mean. I don't know, Isla said. Part of me already is. Every time one of them takes a shot, I feel the wind the way I used to. That's not haunting, Collins said softly. That's legacy. Maybe, but legacies, Isla thought, always come with ghosts. The next morning, training took a turn. Monroe was on the line, target at 2.5 miles. Wind 3 knots cross, mirage thin, air density low, perfect variables. He steadied, fired. Hit. The others cheered quietly, restrained but proud. Monroe turned toward Isla, half smiling. That one for you, Corporal. She nodded once, professional. You're ready. For what? For whatever comes next. She meant it. But something in her voice carried a tremor, pride wrapped in farewell. Later that night, Collins found her packing. Orders. Isla nodded. Command wants me to evaluate another unit, temporary assignment. Temporary, Collins repeated, frowning. Or convenient. Maybe both. Collins sighed. Do me a favor, don't vanish this time. Isla gave a faint, tired smile. I don't vanish, I just move between silences. She slung her duffel over her shoulder, stepped into the cool desert air, and looked back once at the range, at the flags, at the faint heat still rising from the sand. Every place leaves a trace, but some traces are meant to fade. She left before dawn again, same as she'd arrived, quiet, unannounced, unphotographed. The transport truck rolled across the desert, dust trailing like memory. Behind her, the facility shrank into nothing. Ahead, only horizon. For the first time in years, she felt something close to peace. Not the kind that comes from forgetting, the kind that comes from finally remembering everything and still choosing to move forward. As the sun climbed, she rested her head against the window, eyes half closed. Somewhere between miles, she whispered to herself, half prayer, half confession. Perfection is not hitting the target. It's living with the shot after it lands. The wind carried her words away again. And she let it. That night, far from any base, the sky stretched wide and star-laden. Isla stood alone on a hill, overlooking a valley lit by moonlight. She unpacked her rifle, assembled it piece by piece, not to shoot but to remember. Each click, each motion, was both farewell and forgiveness. When the scope settled, she didn't look for targets. She aimed at the horizon itself, at the invisible line between what had been and what might be. Somewhere a memory whispered, "Hit." She smiled, whispered back, "Not this time." She lowered the rifle, breathing in the stillness, letting it fill her. No applause, no orders, just the quiet understanding that mastery and mercy can live in the same hands. And when the night wind rose again, it felt almost like thanks. The call came at night. No insignia, no sender, just a line of coordinates and a single word, assist. Corporal Isla Thorne read it twice, though she already knew what it meant. Temporary assignments rarely stayed temporary. Sooner or later, every ghost gets summoned. By dawn, she was on a transport plane slicing through a sky the color of steel. Below, mountains rolled like sleeping giants. Above, the light kept changing, as if even the sun was uncertain. A captain briefed her mid-flight. "Recon Team Alpha went dark 12 hours ago," he said, voice steady, eyes tired. "Satellite imagery shows hostiles moving through a canyon grid near Karzed Valley. We've got civilians pinned between both sides. You're to provide overwatch for extraction." "Extraction or elimination?" she asked. He hesitated, both depending on movement. That was answer enough. She stared out the window. The clouds looked soft from above, but she knew the land beneath was hard, unforgiving. War had a way of turning every map into a confession. They touched down at a forward outpost just after noon, a cluster of tents and calm towers perched on the edge of nowhere. Dusk clung to everything, including truth. The unit commander met her at the runway, a tall man with the haunted calm of someone who'd seen more names than faces. "Corporal Thorne, you're the legend from Redstone, right?" "Just Thorne," she said. He handed her a data tablet. "You'll like this spot. High ridge, clear sightlines, long range. You'll be our eye." She nodded. The word "eye" always carried weight. To watch was to know was to bear. By late afternoon she was in position, a rocky overlook that bled into shadow. Below, the canyon stretched like a scar. Heat waves shimmered over broken stone, and faint movement flickered near the far bend, shapes she could barely distinguish through the mirage. She set up her rifle with ritual precision, bipod locked, scope leveled, wind measured with a thread of grass. Her world narrowed to numbers, angles, breadth. Command's voice crackled in her earpiece. "Alpha team entering zone. Visual confirm hostiles." "Negative," she whispered. "Mirage interference adjusting elevation." Her heart slowed. Every beat a metronome. Every inhale a countdown. Then a flash. Movement. 5 armed figures advancing. And behind them, 3 unarmed, small, hesitant, clinging to each other. "Civilians." "Command, confirm non-combatants in grid D9, she said. "Static then, copy, prioritize hostile suppression." She exhaled once. Orders were simple until you could see the faces. Through the scope, the nearest target stepped forward, rifle raised, unaware that death watched from 2 miles away. Isla centered the crosshairs, fingertip tightening. She stopped. The civilians were directly behind him. Any wind shift, any misread, collateral. Command, negative shot, civilians in backline. Silence. Then curt, "Thorne, we need coverage." "I can't guarantee separation." "Then make it." She hated that phrase. "Make it." She adjusted again, half mil right, 2 clicks down. The target's silhouette wavered in the heat. Her breathing slowed until even the heartbeat noise disappeared. Time folded. A child stumbled behind the fighter, reaching for something in the sand. Her finger froze. She heard the echo of another day, the winter op, the cry that never came. "Not again." "Thorne, you have authorization," Command insisted. "Repeat, authorization confirmed." She closed her eyes. Opened them. Shifted target. The shot cracked like thunder across glass. The bullet carved through heat, air, memory. Impact clean, contained, safe. Hostile down, civilians untouched. Hit confirmed, she whispered. But she didn't breathe relief. Because there were more. The firefight escalated. Echoes bounced off the canyon walls like ghosts arguing with themselves. Isla moved through targets methodically, not hunting, not raging, just controlling chaos one breath at a time. Each shot a decision. Each decision a burden. When it ended, dusk had arrived. The radio hummed. Alpha team secure, civilians extracted. Good work, Overwatch. Good work. Two words that always sounded like apology. She packed up her rifle slowly, hands steady but heart heavy. The canyon below was quiet again, but silence had never meant peace. It only meant counting. 7 rounds, 5 confirmed, 2 warnings, 0 regrets, at least none that could be measured. Still, she felt the old ache rising. That sharp awareness that skill and mercy can't live in the same heartbeat forever. Back at the outpost, the commander met her near the operations tent. You saved 6 lives today, maybe more. She didn't respond. He tried again. You did good, Thorne. She looked at him, tired, eyes steady. No one does good out here, sir. We just try to do less harm. He said nothing after that. There was no answer worth giving. Later, alone in the observation tower, she watched the horizon fade into indigo. The smell of gunpowder still clung to her hands, even after washing. She rubbed her palms together, as if friction could erase memory. The stars came out one by one. Tiny, perfect targets in an endless sky. Behind her, footsteps soft, hesitant. Captain Collins. Figured you end up here, Collins said, offering a metal flask. Coffee or penance, depending on how you take it. Isla accepted it wordlessly. The warmth grounded her. They called me after the op, Collins continued. Told me what you did. Commands pleased. Pleased, Isla repeated, almost to herself. Interesting word. Collins leaned against the railing. You didn't take the first shot. No. Because of them. Yes. You know that restraint, that's rare. It shouldn't be, Isla said quietly. But we train people to count hits, not hesitations. Collins smiled faintly. That's why you teach. Isla turned to face the horizon again. That's why I still breathe. For a while, neither spoke. The wind was the only sound, carrying dust and unspoken truths between them. Finally, Collins asked, Do you ever think about stopping? Every day. So why don't you? Isla thought about that. Because someone has to show them what control really looks like. Not the shot, the choice not to take it. Collins nodded, eyes glistening. If that's not courage, I don't know what is. The next morning, Isla stood at the firing range again, alone by choice. The desert stretched in every direction, infinite and uncaring. She set a single target at 4,000 yards, not for record, not for pride, for clarity. She lay prone, adjusted the scope, measured the air. The same ritual, the same silence. But when she aligned the crosshairs, there was nothing on the other end. No enemy, no mission, just space. She took one slow breath, then lowered the rifle. Didn't fire. Because today wasn't about proving she could. It was about proving she didn't have to. She stood, letting the wind move around her, her hair catching the light. Somewhere behind her, the outpost came alive, orders shouted, engines warming, life resuming. But here, in this thin sliver of dawn, she was simply human again. That night she wrote a report, factual, brief, emotionless. Then, at the bottom, she added one line not meant for command. Sometimes precision isn't the point. Sometimes mercy is the higher aim. She signed it, closed the file, and looked out across the camp. In the distance, Monroe's trainees from Range 17 were arriving to relieve her. New blood, new hope. She smiled faintly. "Your turn," she whispered to the dark. When she left the outpost the next morning, no one saluted. They just watched her go, the quiet figure with a duffel and a rifle case, walking toward the waiting transport under the breaking sky. She didn't look back. Some distances, once measured, never need revisiting. The desert wind rose behind her, carrying the faintest echo of a single, perfect shot. Not the one that killed. The one she chose not to take. The plane lifted into the pale light of dawn. She closed her eyes, listening to the engine hum beneath her. For the first time in years, the sound didn't remind her of war. It reminded her of return. She thought of the trainees, the general, the child she couldn't save, the lives she quietly protected. All of it blended into one truth: painful, beautiful, final. Precision without compassion is just geometry. But compassion with precision, that's grace. And as the clouds parted, sunlight broke through like forgiveness. It fell across her hands, steady, scarred, still capable of gentleness. She smiled, almost imperceptibly, and whispered to the window. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. Months passed. The war didn't end. Wars never really do, but they began to forget her name. Which was fine. Corporal Isla Thorne had never belonged to stories. She belonged to silence. Some said she'd retired. Others whispered she'd been reassigned to some secret division that didn't exist. But the truth was simpler. She had simply walked away. Now she lived near the edge of nowhere, a small house on a hillside overlooking the desert, where the horizon met the sky without apology. The kind of place where sound traveled slowly and time forgot to hurry. In the mornings, she brewed coffee on an old iron stove and watched the sun crawl up from behind the hills. The air here was dry and forgiving. The kind of air that didn't judge what you'd done to survive. Her rifle hung above the doorway, clean, oiled, untouched. Not as a weapon, but as memory. A reminder that precision wasn't about the target. It was about control, the kind that came from restraint. Some days she'd drive down the winding road to the small town nearby, a grocery run, a mechanic visit, a quiet walk past people who never asked questions. No uniforms here. No salutes. Just nods and the occasional "morning, ma'am," from strangers who somehow sensed she'd seen things they couldn't name. At the diner, the waitress knew her routine: black coffee, no sugar, one seat by the window. The TV above the counter played the news in endless loops. Politics, conflict, the same noise she'd traded years of silence to escape. Sometimes the footage would show soldiers somewhere far away, shapes in sand, echoes of orders she once followed without hesitation. She'd sip her coffee, watching but not really watching. Not with judgment, not even nostalgia. Just quiet understanding. Because once you've lived inside war, you stop hating it. You start recognizing it, the way a scar recognizes the wound that made it. Every now and then she'd get a letter unmarked, routed through strange channels. One arrived in late spring. The handwriting was careful, almost formal. She opened it at the table while sunlight poured through the window. "Corporal Thorne, I thought you'd like to know Liu qualified top of her class. Monroe's leading a training group now. He still quotes you, by the way. The rifle knows when you're lying. We're calling it the Thorne Doctrine. You taught us more than distance. You taught us purpose. Wherever you are, thank you. Captain Rhea Collins." Isla folded the letter carefully, setting it beside her cup. She didn't smile, not exactly, but something inside her softened. A piece of the weight lifted. So maybe the silence had spoken after all. Just not in words she needed to hear. One evening, she stood outside her house, watching a storm build across the horizon. Lightning flickered in the distance, slow and deliberate, like the world exhaling through light. The desert smelled of rain. It always reminded her of deployment, those moments before contact when the air went heavy with electricity and fear. But tonight it just smelled like change. She thought of the general, of his trembling hands, of that day on the range when disbelief turned into wonder. She thought of the child from the winter ridge. She thought of the people who never came back, and the few who did. And for once, she didn't try to sort the memories into right and wrong. She just let them exist, side by side, like constellations no one else could see. A sound behind her, tires on gravel. She turned. A vehicle approached slowly up the hill. Black SUV, government plates. Old instincts flared. But when the door opened, it wasn't command. It was General Aldridge. He looked different this time, relaxed, unguarded, like a man who'd finally made peace with his ghosts. He smiled when he saw her. "You're a hard woman to find." "I try to be," she said. He stepped closer, removing his cap. "Hope I'm not intruding." "Not unless you brought orders." He chuckled. "No, just conversation." She gestured toward the porch. "Coffee's fresh." They sat side by side in the fading light, two soldiers pretending not to be. The desert spread before them, wide, eternal, uncaring. Aldridge sipped his cup, then looked at her. "You know, they still talk about you at Redstone. There's a plaque now. Doesn't name you, but everyone knows." "Plaques fade," she said. "True, but legends don't. Legends are just noise that forgot what silence sounded like." He smiled faintly, still humble. She shrugged, still realistic. For a while neither spoke. The sun dipped lower, turning everything gold and soft. Then Aldridge said quietly, "I wanted to thank you properly this time, not for the shot but for what came after. You reminded a whole generation what restraint looks like." She looked down at her hands. "It's not restraint, it's responsibility." He nodded, "And that's rarer than skill." He finished his coffee, set the cup down, and reached into his pocket. "Brought you something." He handed her a small metal tag, weathered, etched with a single word, "Thorne." She frowned slightly. "Dog tag." It was found in an old storage locker at Car's Ed, near where Alpha was extracted. "Probably yours. Figured it belonged back where it came from." She took it, feeling the cold metal against her skin. It wasn't about sentiment. It was about acknowledgement that she had existed in the record of things, even if only as a ghost. "Thank you," she said quietly. He nodded, stood, and looked out toward the horizon. "Take care of yourself, Corporal." "I do," she said, "just differently." As he walked back to his vehicle, he paused once more. "You ever think about going back?" She shook her head. "I already did, just not to the same place." He seemed to understand. Good answer. Then he was gone, swallowed by dust and distance. She watched until the vehicle became part of the horizon, then turned back toward her house. The sky had darkened. The storm was closer now. Thunder rolled, deep and steady, like memory returning without regret. That night she couldn't sleep. Not from restlessness, from reflection. The kind that comes only when there's nothing left to prove. She sat by the window, the storm flashing across the desert. Each lightning strike illuminated the land like an X-ray, showing bones, scars, truths. She thought of Collins's letter, of Monroe's patience, of the quiet, new generation learning to measure their worth not by what they destroyed, but by what they preserved. Maybe that was the point all along. Not to create perfection, but to create people who could carry it gently. She stood, walked to the rifle hanging on the wall, and lifted it down one last time. The weight was familiar, comforting, dangerous, sacred. She opened the chamber, checked it, then carried it outside into the rain. She knelt and placed it gently in the sand. The rain began to soak the barrel, darkening it to silver. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible over the storm. "You've done enough." She turned, walked back inside, leaving the weapon where it lay, half buried, half free. By morning, it would be covered in a thin film of earth and water. And for the first time, it would rest. Weeks later, she received one more letter, this one unsigned, typed on plain paper. It read, "Your doctrine has been integrated into advanced marksmanship programs across 3 branches. Training now includes a final question before qualification. When should you not take the shot? We call it the Thorne pause." She read it twice, then folded it carefully and tucked it into the back of Collins's earlier letter. No pride, no fanfare. Just quiet satisfaction. The world had learned to breathe between actions. That was enough. That evening, she hiked to the ridge behind her house. The storm had cleared. The air smelled of rain and iron. From up here, the desert stretched forever, vast and forgiving. She sat down, pulled her knees close, and watched the horizon fade into starlight. No uniforms. No rank. No titles. Just a woman who had measured every distance and finally stopped counting. The wind whispered through the dry grass, carrying fragments of voices, laughter, commands, echoes of training grounds that no longer existed. It didn't haunt her anymore. It hummed like gratitude. She smiled faintly. "You're welcome," she whispered. Dawn came slow and kind. The first rays broke over the hills, catching the edge of the buried rifle, just enough to make it gleam for a heartbeat before the light moved on. A quiet salute. Isla Thorne stood, stretched, and began her walk back down the hill. Each step deliberate, each breath steady. And somewhere, deep within that still desert morning, her story continued, not in words, not in records, but in the unseen decisions of others who had learned from her silence. Because some legacies don't echo. They resonate. And some heroes don't return home to applause. They simply fade into peace. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. And then quietly it forgives itself.